What if a single joke could change the world? Hi there, I'm Chris with a K, and welcome back to This Week in Queer History, where we celebrate queer moments and icons that I wish I had known about as a young gay kid growing up in conservative America. Today, we're exploring something unexpected, how queer stand-up comedy reshaped public opinion. Imagine an audience going crazy with laughter, and then slowly and gently, a window opens up that changes their entire worldview. Today, we're traveling from the 1920s to the 2020s to explore the untold story of queer comedy and its power to open minds and hearts, one punchline at a time.
This week in queer history, stories told with love and glee.
Comedy has always been one of our community's stealthiest survival tools. It's kind of like an over-the-top bedazzled Swiss Army knife, sharp on one end and sparkly on the other. And long before anyone was marching with picket signs, LGBTQ people were standing up on stages, telling jokes and truths that couldn't be spoken in the outside world. So let's go back. All the way back. This is pre-Stonewall, pre-Pride parades, pre-rainbow slapped on everything. We're going back to the decades when queerness lived in the shadows. But humor? Humor was sneaking through the cracks. One of the earliest examples comes from the Pansy Craze of the 1920s and 30s. While America was sipping bathtub gin and swing dancing away, queer performers were taking over nightlife, from New York to LA. Clubs like the ones in Times Square featured openly effeminate male comics and drag performers who used gender-bending humor as their weapon of choice. Enter Gene Mallon, one of the highest-paid nightclub acts of the 1930s. You'd see Mallon performing in beautifully tailored tuxedos, or perhaps glamorous gowns. It all depended on the mood, and Mallon was prepared with a sharp wit that was both entertainment and self-defense rolled into one. When hecklers in the crowd would try to trip him up, he would launch into a verbal read that would slice the heckler to pieces. The roaring approval of the crowd showed that humor could act as resistance and survival. But as queer visibility grew, so did the backlash. By the mid-1930s, police raids and new censorship laws shut down many of the clubs hosting the Pansy Craze shows. Still, this period planted seeds of change in the minds of the public. Queer comedy was influencing culture, not from the streets, but from the stage. But as the law cracked down, queer comedy didn't disappear, it just went underground and got smarter. In Britain, during the 1960s, listeners tuning into the BBC radio show Round the Horn fell in love with two flamboyantly witty characters, Julian and Sandy. Mainstream listeners heard silliness, but queer listeners, they heard something entirely different. Polari. This secret slang language helped gay men identify one another while dodging criminalization. Julian and Sandy joked in Polari right on public radio. They made double entendres, wordplay, and clever digs that straight audiences missed entirely. And this wasn't just comedy. It was subversive resistance. Meanwhile, in San Francisco during the 1950s and early 60s, the Black Cat Cafe became a sanctuary of drag, satire, and queer joy. At the heart of it was Jose Sarria, the first openly gay candidate for public office in the US. But before he was a political pioneer, he was a nightclub star. Sarria ended every show by leading the crowd in a drag parody of the national anthem. God save us Nelly Queens. It was funny, it was defiant, it was a middle finger disguised as a melody. And in a world where police raids were common, that song was a rallying cry. Sarria's performances helped shift public policy, literally. His work contributed to a crucial 1951 court ruling preventing the city from revoking bar licenses just for serving queer patrons. Humor didn't just challenge norms, it helped change laws. And then in 1962, comedian Moms Mabley, a black lesbian comedian who had been doing stand-up since the 1920s, performed at Carnegie Hall. Her queer-coded humor, wearing androgynous clothing and playing with gender boundaries and sexuality, it created a space for queerness in comedy long before it was safe. Then came Stonewall in 1969, and queer performers didn't just come out, they burst out. In the 1970s, queer comedians began stepping onto mainstream stages without coded language, without apology, and without the need for 3 layers of metaphor. Robin Tyler, one of the first openly lesbian comedians, toured nationally, cracking jokes about feminist politics, relationships, and religion with sharp, unapologetic humor. She showed that lesbian comedy wasn't just a niche, it was part of America now. Across the country, queer comedy clubs began growing. One became legendary. The Valencia Rose in San Francisco opened in 1982, widely recognized as the first LGBTQ comedy club in the US. Performers like Tom Amiano, a gay teacher turned comedian, hosted weekly showcases that became the heartbeat of queer comedy during the AIDS crisis. And yes, in the 1980s, as AIDS devastated the queer community, comedy became a lifeline. Performers like Whoopi Goldberg in her early one-woman shows played queer-coded characters that challenged stigma. Meanwhile, queer comics used dark humor to cope and to educate. They joked about hospital visits, bureaucratic cruelty, and politicians who treated them like afterthoughts, because jokes meant reclaiming power when everything felt powerless. And groups like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence used camp drag satire and street theater to spread safe sex education. Their work wasn't just funny, it saved lives. And then came a visibility boom. In 1994, Bob Smith became the first openly gay man to perform stand-up on The Tonight Show. His act wasn't defensive or coded. He simply talked about his boyfriend the way that any straight comedian talked about theirs. That normalcy was revolutionary. Meanwhile, queer characters in sitcoms began to shift. While some were stereotypes, others, like early Ellen, opened doors, even before her big coming out episode in 1997. Comedy clubs across the country saw a rise in queer acts. Lesbian comics like Kate Clinton toured college campuses, talking openly about politics, homophobia, and sexism with humor so sharp that the laughter stung. As the internet democratized comedy, LGBTQ voices found wider audiences. Margaret Cho's stand-up blended activism and comedy like no one else, making politics hilarious while holding mirrors up to society. Wanda Sykes, after coming out in 2008, brought lesbian visibility to the mainstream while joking about race, marriage, equality, and the family. And then, in 2018, Hannah Gadsby cracked open the entire forum with Nanette, proving that comedy can hold rage, trauma, and truth alongside laughter. And beyond America, queer comedy blossomed globally. In India, Vasu Premlani used humor to challenge stigma and educate corporations on LGBTQ rights. Her comedy didn't just entertain, it rewired understanding. Today, queer comedians headline Netflix specials, they host podcasts, they fill stadiums, and they shape culture from the center stage. Humor, once a whisper in a dark bar, is now a microphone, broadcasting worldwide. And the impact? Public opinion has shifted because their jokes cracked open unspoken topics and told human truths. Comedy was basically a family sport in my house. Not the kind where you sit down and watch a sitcom together kind, but more like a constant, ambient, Olympic level goofing off. We were the kind of family that couldn't pass the mashed potatoes without someone making a joke about it. Humor was how we said, I love you, and how we smoothed over tension, and how we stayed close even when life was messy. So I grew up thinking that laughter was just what all families did. It was a reflex and a language. But back then, comedy didn't feel queer to me. It felt universal and safe and kind of straight by default, if that makes sense. I mean, I loved funny people and I loved comic timing. I loved a perfectly landed punchline, but I wasn't aware of comedy as a place where queerness could live out loud. I didn't know I was missing anything. I didn't know that there was a door that I hadn't opened yet. But then Margaret Cho entered my life like a friendly wrecking ball. I'd never seen someone be so raw and fearlessness and so socially aware and still keep the room laughing. I remember feeling two things at once, joy and a kind of startled honesty. The laughter wasn't an escape hatch, it was the way in. Comedy wasn't hiding the truth, it was shining a spotlight on it, making the spotlight warm enough that nobody had to run away. And that felt like magic. It made me realize how humor can hold up a mirror without turning into a lecture. And it can invite people in to hard realities while keeping everyone connected through the simple act of laughing together. And then I remember the first time watching Little Britain and seeing Matt Lucas do The Only Gay in the Village, and I laughed so hard I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just sketch. It was hilarious. It was this feeling of recognition underneath it, the cross-dressing and the gender swapping and all those characters that live just a little outside of the normal box. And all of a sudden it felt like this secret club that I didn't know I belonged to until that moment. It was like that show was winking at something that I'd been carrying around quietly in my body all along. And then suddenly it wasn't quiet anymore. And Lily Tomlin, Lily, I didn't know she was gay when I was younger, and learning it later didn't change my love for her work. If anything, it deepened it. She was doing character work in a world that wasn't exactly throwing confetti at queer women, yet there she was, this quiet defiance in how real her characters felt, how human, how uncaricatured. And she wasn't asking permission to take up space. She was just taking it, beautifully taking it. Looking back, it feels like another form of comedy bravery, being yourself in a time when being yourself wasn't safe, and still finding a way to make people laugh and feel seen. When I think of queer stand-up now, especially those pre-Stonewall performers who were using coded language and whispering truth through jokes, I feel so much gratitude for them. Comedy has always been a kind of underground railroad for truth, and it carries people from isolation to belonging, from fear to possibility. And it doesn't fix everything, but it makes a little more room. It makes the hard stuff feel survivable. It definitely reminds me that laughter isn't the opposite of pain. It's often the way that we walk straight through it and come out holding hands on the other side. If you enjoyed this look at queer comedy's history, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you click the video popping up right over here, you'll get a little bit more LGBTQ history. You can also check out myqueerbirthday.com for other icons and events that happened on your birthday. Link is down in the description below. Until next time, stay strong, stay bold, and keep making history.